Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know.
My name is Sam Chandler. I was on episode 167, and I'm coming back to finish up what I started on that episode. I think I left off around the time that my wife and I were starting to have visitations at my house in Georgia. And that progressed kind of in a way, it was a gradual progression. It was about a week or so of nightly tapping on the window. And I guess that was kind of a way to just get us acclimated to or adjusted to them coming around the house, getting used to it, I guess. And then it kind of turned into glyphs, where they would take like sticks and leave them in certain places around the yard, mostly in the backyard. And there would be, take sticks and they'd put them in certain designs, and they would leave them on the driveway, in certain places, and just kind of letting us know that they were around and wanting their presence to be known. Then it would turn into occasionally, say like in the middle of the night while I'd be asleep, you would hear on the wall behind my head, you would hear like a tapping or, not a smacking like they would do at the cabin, but more of like a gentle, tapping with their hand against the vinyl siding that was on that side of the house. And, occasionally you would hear like a tree branch break or just some noises in the trees behind the house. And there were times where I felt like they wanted me to come outside. And you know how it is when it's around 3 a.m. or so, you're very comfy in bed, you're deep asleep. And I won't say that I regret much in life, but I do regret those times, because those times I would just stay in bed. I would choose to stay in bed because I was comfortable. I think I took that for granted because I kind of assumed that I would have other opportunities to go outside and talk to them or interact with them, and it ended up not coming to fruition. But a couple of stories that happened. One was they would do, they'll do little pranks and little funny stuff around the house. So one night I rolled my trash cans down the driveway, and I had kind of a long driveway, but I rolled it down to the end of the driveway, put them on the street, and came back up. And while I was walking back up my driveway, my across the street neighbor had a dog that they used to tie up to a tree in the front yard. And that dog would just start barking. Well, when I rolled my trash cans down, the dog started barking at me. And normally when the dog gets going, they would just bark for hours. And I went inside, and I remember telling my wife, like, the dog's barking again, and it became a nuisance to us because it was one of those things that, like, you'd just be laying in bed at night, you'd hear the dog barking. Well, we discussed it, and we, just being annoyed with the situation and the fact that they were leaving their dog outside all night, we decided that we were going to call animal control. And so, we made the decision the next day we were going to call animal control, and we ended up just going to sleep. We were laying in bed that night, and I heard a tapping on the window that's on my side of the bed. And the thing about that window is that it faced the backyard, and my backyard was fenced in. Normally they would tap on my wife's window, and my wife's window was on the side of the house that faced the forest, and it was easier for them to access that window. So in order for them to get to my window, they would have to somehow get over the fence without it breaking and then tap on the window. So when I heard them tapping on my window on my side of the bed, that really got my attention. So I woke up and thought, like, oh, that's different. They don't normally do that. And so I laid there trying to see what was going on. And then I heard maybe about a minute later, I heard this really loud, like crack, like a tree break. And it popped really loud and, heard some commotion. Nothing really big, but just enough to really get my attention. And I remember thinking like, okay, I wonder where this is going. And so I waited and listened and nothing else happened. And I eventually fell back asleep. So the next morning I woke up, did my usual thing, get ready for work. I go out to my car, start my car, and I start to head down the driveway. And when I get down about halfway down the driveway, I noticed that my trash cans that I had rolled down the street were actually in the middle of my driveway, and they had been turned around and they were facing the other direction. And so I stopped the car and I kind of just, smiled and said, ha, guys, real funny. Cause that's the type of stuff that they would do, just, I guess it's like teenagers playing pranks or whatever. That's kind of how it seemed to come across a lot of the time. And so, I get out to move the trash cans. So I roll them down to the end of the street or the end of the driveway again. I put them back to where they were. And I looked up across the street to the tree that the dog was normally tied up to. And I noticed that tree had been broken and it had been pushed over and it was laying in the front yard, and that the dog was actually inside the house. And it took me a second to realize what had happened, because I had completely forgotten about what had happened the night before with the tapping on the window and the loud noises. And then I realized that they had broken that tree, and that solved my dog problem. We never had that dog in the front yard of that house again, and we never had to call animal control. So to me, what that showed me was that they were able to hear us. I don't know. I mean, I understand this stuff now, but at the time I didn't know how they would do it. But they were essentially reading our thoughts and listening in on us, and figured that they could step in and help. And it was greatly appreciated. And so that is the type of relationship that can be formed with them if they choose to do so. And I really appreciated their help in that situation. And then another thing that happened, and this was so we ended up moving a few months after that incident. And this was on Halloween morning of all mornings, but not the tree falling, but this new story that I'm about to tell was on Halloween morning. I woke up at around 5:00 in the morning to the sound of somebody running through my living room on my hardwood floors. And it was just, woke up to plop, 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 like somebody just slapping their feet across the floor as they ran across the floor. And, my wife and I both woke up, and we both kind of, were like, oh, did you hear that? What was that? And then, so we assumed that one of my sons were up. So I got up to go check on them, and I walked down the hallway and went to, check on them in their bedrooms, and they were both asleep. And so I don't know what that was. I have an idea of what it was, but I don't know for sure. No doors were open and nothing like that. So that was another one of those weird head scratchers that can sometimes happen when you're interacting with these fellows and ladies, I guess. So that was just a good a good laugh at that. I don't really get freaked out at these things now. I did a little bit, but I kind of find the humor in it now, because I feel safe with them enough that when these things happen, I don't get weirded out. So some people might see that as like aggressive or something. I don't see it that way. I just see it as like just goofing off, maybe little pranks and stuff. So, like I said, shortly after that, we ended up moving to Oregon, in 2017. And, we moved, I want to say it was like early April. I think it was late March, early April. We got to Oregon, and we got settled in, started my new job and everything. And then about a month and a half later, so this would have been early May, we, decided that we were going to go try to camp. And so we packed up all of our stuff and decided that we were just going to go for an overnight stay in an area, that I had been looking up on a map. And so we drove back and ended up finding that the road that led up to the forest road that we needed to get to was actually closed for the winter. And it didn't open back up until late June, early July. So the road was still closed, and I was a little perturbed. And so we turned around and we went down to the next forest road that we could find, and we turned down that one. We drove down that forest road for a while, and then we found our way back to where we wanted to go. And we just ended up heading back to this small lake. And we were probably, I want to say 15 miles or so back and down this forest road. We found this lake, we got parked and we got set up, found a nice little camp area. We were dispersed camping, so it wasn't an actual campground. It was just back into the forest. There was still a decent amount of snow on certain parts of the road, so we couldn't go back all the way that we wanted to. So anyways, we set up camp, and it started to get, like, while we were sitting there, we made a fire. It started to get pretty cold. As soon as the sun went down, the temperature dropped very quickly. And we realized that we weren't really prepared for it to get as cold as it was going to be. So, because where we were, the elevation it made it about 10 degrees cooler than we expected. And so I think my wife and I would have been fine, but with my sons being there, and they were both really young at the time, we just weren't sure that we were prepared enough for it to get that cold. So we decided to pack up, go back home, and then we would come back in a couple of weeks, and hopefully it would warm up and we'd bring more gear. Well, so we packed up the car, and I had parked again, like on the edge of the forest road with the driver's side facing the forest. And when I went around the driver's side to start the engine, to get in the car to start the engine to warm it up a little bit, my wife was walking to get to the passenger door. I walked around the driver's side. And when I walked between the forest and the driver's side of the car to get to the driver's door, two really big somethings came charging at me through the woods and stopped about 10 feet from the tree line or so. And it startled me, and I kind of just stood there. And when I looked into the trees, I couldn't see anything because it was dark back in there. And my wife stood on the, like the door seal or the frame rail or, of the truck, of our 4Runner, sorry. And she looked over the top of it and she said, "Did you hear that?" And I was like, yeah, I heard it. They're standing right here, whatever it is, they're right here. And, so I figured it was somebody coming to let us know that they knew we were there, and they wanted us to know they were there. And so I thanked them. I said, "Thank you for letting us and share the space, and we really appreciate it." And so we got loaded up in the car, got the kids loaded up, and we left. And I knew at that point that was going to be my new spot. That was going to be the spot that I was going to start going up to and trying to visit with them. And so I continued to go to that area. That ended up being my spot. I would go like once a week. I would get up early in the morning and I would go up there and I would just walk around and explore and try and figure out the whole area and get like an idea of the geography and everything that was going on. There was a very large like rock outcropping on top of this one section that I used to go, and I would go all through the Manzanita and get up there, and I would just sit on top of those rocks and just kind of like sit in the sun and meditate. And then I would go back down and walk around the lake. And I spent a lot of time in that area. But they would always do little things to let me know they were there, right? So they would either like break sticks whenever I would walk by certain places. They would, there was just a lot. They would do little things. Like sometimes I would just go back to my car, and as soon as I would get back to my car, they would, break a branch or something from across the lake, or just let me know that they were there. So I kept going to that place for a while, and then we found another area too that we started going camping at. And as the crow flies, this new area that we went to was probably about 10 or 12 miles away. But in order to get to it, you had to go through a pass and then go around a long way. So driving, it was about an hour more away, but as the crow flies, it was only about 10 miles. There's no roads or trails that connect these two areas without going around the pass. So on this particular trip, this was about a year later. So this was May of 2018 in the new place that we had been to. We had been there twice already. And on this particular night, we were camping with some friends, and it was early in the season. So on that side of the mountains, it's a little bit more wet, and it's a little bit more of like a rainforest setting. So early in the season, there's a lot more mosquitoes. And that first day we were there in camp, we had a fire going, and we kept having to cut like green branches down to throw them on the fire to get the smoke in the general area to increase. That kind of helps keep the mosquitoes down because they were really bad. And so throughout the whole day, we were just chopping wood. So we had a big pile of wood with all these branches, and we would chop the branches up and throw the green growth onto the fire to get a good smoke going. Well, that night, we went to sleep. We were in the tent, and I'm not sure exactly what time it was in the morning, but it was sometime, around the bewitching hour, the time when these things usually happen, say like 3 or so. I heard a very just like clear and crisp wood knock from a tree near the forest road. And where we were camping, we were probably about, I would say 50, 60 yards inside the tree line from where the forest road was. And I heard the knock. It was 2 or 3 like bop, bop, bop against the tree, and it woke me up. I sat there and listened, and I didn't hear anything else after that, but I kind of just was see what was going on around us. And then maybe 30 seconds after I heard the wood knock, I heard somebody chopping wood at our wood pile. And not like hard, but just, it was as if someone picked up the hatchet and was just lightly like chopping some of the wood that we had laid out for the fire. And again, they did that for about a minute or two, and then it was just quiet again and nothing else. But I got an image of a young one, and it was almost as if they had been watching us chop wood all day, and then they got the idea that they wanted to try that and see what it was like. And they came into camp that night and just played with the hatchet for a little bit and then left. And again, I didn't see anything, so I can't say for sure that was a Sasquatch, but where we were was far enough back that if any human had tried to come back and camp, I definitely would have heard that, because I would have been very well aware of where we were. There was nobody else around us for miles if I didn't see or hear any other people that whole weekend. So that was an interesting experience for sure. And in that meantime, I had met up with a couple people, and we had done some camps in the Mount Hood area and had a few experiences at a couple places. Nothing really mind-blowing, but just, things like footsteps walking through camp at night, or wood knocks and things like that happened. So in 2019, there was a conference in Enumclaw, Washington, and I decided that I was going to drive up there and go visit with some friends and go see some people. So I drove up to Enumclaw, and I decided that I was going to camp at a campground that was about 30 minutes away. So I got the campsite, got to the conference, hung out with some people, and that was on that first Friday. So during the conference that night, the speakers did a little bit of introductions, and they were talking about some things, and they allowed the floor for anyone who wanted to come up and talk about their experiences. And at that point, I still was not comfortable speaking about the things that I had encountered, or that I had been experiencing. I just wasn't comfortable being a public speaker. And so I was sitting there with Keith Bearden at his table, and he said to me at one point, he said, "You should go up there and tell some of your stories because you've got some good stuff." And I was like, "Nah, I don't think I can yet. I'm not comfortable speaking in public yet." And so he said, "No, I understand." And so we just listened to the rest of the stories, and the night ended. We said our goodbyes and everything, and then I drove to where I was camping. Well, while I was camping that night, I was sitting by the campfire, and I was reading a book, and it was quiet. There was nobody else in the campground. And I heard a voice in my head say, "You have to start talking about this stuff." Or "You must start talking about this stuff," something along those lines. And it was very, very clear. And it wasn't like something that I felt like I needed to explain or argue with. I just said, "Okay." And I understood that it's important for us to discuss these things. And that they want us to discuss these things with people. And so there was just this emphasis on that. And I know for some people that might be a little bit hard to understand or a little bit unbelievable, but it is important, and they want us to discuss these things. So I said, "Okay, you're right." And I went back to the conference the next day. I just tried to pay attention to everybody and watch everybody speak, and I just began to work on making myself more comfortable being in public spaces like that and discussing things like that. So I went home, and I started to make more posts on the internet and on social media about things that I had experienced. And right around that time, I was asked to do a video podcast or show, and it was the first one I had ever done. And I was like, "Okay, cool. So this is progressing." I did the show, and it was good. It went well. And maybe about a week after that, and this is something that I don't really know how to explain with words, but I started getting these energy fluctuations in my body. I would start, and it was similar to what I had experienced when I was camping by myself in Canada a few years before that, in which I would get those energy rushes going through my body. Only these were a little bit, they weren't as strong, but it would get to the point where I would just feel like my body would be tingling, and I would just feel anxious and just very excited and happy, like a little kid on the night before Christmas, and you're just so excited about getting presents and all that stuff. And I didn't really understand what was going on, and so I reached out to a couple people, and I asked them what they thought, and they gave me some suggestions. And so I started working with that stuff, trying to ground my energy and everything like that. And then I started getting these downloads of information and all these knowings. And there was these messages were coming to me, and they were coming as if it was a group voice that was speaking to me through one voice, through one entity or through one person. And it was very confusing and disorienting at first because I didn't know what was going on. And there's a lot of psychological stuff that happens when you're going through this, or that can happen. And so I was dealing with, honestly, trying to keep my sanity and make sure that I wasn't going crazy. And at the same time, paying attention and listening to the messages and everything and the information that was coming to me. Well, that happened for about a few weeks. I want to say about 6 weeks. And it just it would come in waves and come in waves. And then I went camping on Memorial Day weekend, 2019. And we went to a place that we had been to a few times, and nothing had ever happened at this place before. And so we went, and that first day at camp, it was great. I mean, it was a beautiful day. The clouds were it was sunny, but the clouds were kind of coming through. And where our camp was on top of a ridgeline at about 6,000 feet elevation. And if you're looking to the north, you can see the high desert all the way to Washington State, probably. I mean, just like hundreds of miles of high desert. And there's a little bit of rolling hills that go through like Juniper and Ponderosa. And it's just, overall, it's just a beautiful place to camp, because you can see, panoramically, you can see forever. And we noticed that some storm clouds were starting to come in from the north. And, we, got everything ready. We ate dinner, and then we got everything ready for the tent, to get in the tent. So we got in the tent right around the time that the rain started, and it rained that whole night, and it got cold, not cold enough to snow. It was just above freezing. So it was windy and cold and just really miserable weather. And we got up the next morning, and it was the same thing. The clouds had dropped. So we were cloud level. It was very misty, foggy, rainy, cold, windy, just miserable weather. We spent a lot of time in the tent, playing board games, and, my wife would get out, and my wife and I would get out, and we would, cook, and then I would walk around a little bit, and, then we'd go back in the tent. So it pretty much rained that whole day. That night, it did, towards the end of the night, it started to clear up a little bit. And, so I got to go outside, make a fire, and, I think we got to like roast some marshmallows and a little bit of, normal camping stuff, which was a nice ending to the day, considering the rest of the day was kind of miserable. So we, go back in the tent that night, and it was a little bit breezy when we first laid down. My wife and my sons both went to sleep they all went to sleep relatively quickly. And I laid there and listened to the wind. And, it was one of those nights where it would be still, and then these like little gusts of wind would come in, and it would kind of, swirl around in the trees and everything. And I fell asleep. And then I woke up at about, again, I'm not sure the time because I didn't have a watch or anything near me. I want to say, 2, 3 in the morning, to a tree branch in the valley below us breaking, really loud crack. And it echoed all the way through the valley. And, it woke me up, and I got my heart rate going, because I got my adrenaline, flowing. So I was doing this breathing to try and calm my nerves down. Cause, like those tree breaks and things like that sometimes they'll do to announce themselves when they're coming in. It will get your adrenaline going. I don't care how prepared you are for them. It's just your body's reaction to all of this. So I'm sitting there trying to calm my nerves, and I'm doing my breathing, and, right between the tent and my Forerunner, I heard a whistle, and it's a whistle that I've heard before. It's kind of like a whistle. And so I knew somebody was there right next to the tent. And so I laid there trying to see, where this was going to go. And I continued to do my breathing. And I was taking these really long, deep breaths. And what I was doing was, the way that I calm my nerves is I take my long, deep breath, I focus on the coldness of the air, the coolness of the air. And when it goes into my lungs, I try to imagine the light and energy that's in the breath going into my heart area, right? And that kind of like calms my nerves and soothes everything. Well, right about the time that happened, while I was doing that, my body took this one uncontrollably, like I did not do this. It just took this really deep breath. And as soon as that happened, it like supercharged my chest. And this light ball came out of my chest. Not like, it was like this light spread out from my chest. It kind of like came out and then spread all around me. And, if you can imagine like a protective bubble kind of coming out and then wrapping around you and then like your tent and everything around you. I remember thinking, like being really shocked, like, what was that? And right around that time, this is really hard to explain. And so you're just going to have to bear with me because there's not really words that can explain some of this stuff. Right around that time, I traveled through this, like, it's kind of like as if I turned inside out, and it's like my spirit traveled through this like portal in my heart and traveled through the other side of it. And it was like going through like a light tunnel. And I ended up in this place that was like, speaking about everything that happened in this place would be like, it would probably be a whole show in itself. So I'm not going to get into the full details, but what I will say is I spent some time there and I met, I will say she is a female Sasquatch, in like a spirit form that is kind of like, I guess what you would refer to as a teacher of sorts for them. So when I was there, she was there too. And there was like an introduction. And then after she introduced herself to me, we came back and I traveled back into my body. And while I was laying there and I was like back in my body, she showed me an image of her name, and her name was Vavion. And then there was all these images that started coming in, like rapid imaging. And it was just, it was like language and all these information and all these symbols. There was an infinity symbol. There was like a DNA. There was like something that showed me, and it was a DNA, like a picture of it. And all these like light language and all these different like images were just flooding me. It was like books worth of information were just coming to me. And it was like all these things that were just like flashing before my eyes and all this information. And then that stopped and it got quiet again. And I remember laying there and she was still outside my tent. And I remember asking her if I could come outside, and I fell asleep instantly after I said that. And then I woke up, I don't know, a little bit later, and I sat up and like, I remember rubbing my face and being, just kind of like coming back into my body and just being like aware that I was back and everything had settled back down. And I was like so tripped out by everything that had just happened. And, it was just such a mind-blowing experience for me. And I know that that's going to sound like insane to some people, but it was truly life-changing. And that's when this whole thing changed from a paranormal, like from a phenomenon of learning into a completely spiritual experience for me. And granted, there's still a lot of learning that's happening, but it just changed the whole thing for me. And so that's really where it stopped being just like a physical being in a materialist universe, a materialist reality, into something that is just far beyond anything that I could comprehend and that I had even thought was possible. And so, I, told my wife about it. I'm sure she thought I was crazy. So I went back home and I processed a lot. I mean, it was just a lot to take in. So, I told some people and, explained some things to people from back home, and everybody was super supportive and very excited. And there were some people who actually like understood what had happened, which to me was very reassuring. And yeah, it was just such a cool thing. So the following spring, I, went to the first area that I spoke about where I was, where we tried to go camp, and then it got too cold. So we decided to leave. And that place I had been going to for a long time. So one night, I went there late and decided I was going to camp by myself. So I got back there pretty late that night. I want to say it was 10 or 11. And I parked my 4Runner and got everything set up. And it was real quiet. It was kind of starting to drizzle a little bit that night. And so I got settled in and I was going to get ready to go to sleep. And so I was laying there and I closed my eyes and I was just getting comfortable. I was listening to the noises that were going on around. And right around that time, I got an image. And this was as if someone had projected this on the back of my eyelids. I mean, it was crystal clear. And it was an image of a Sasquatch person. And he was just looking at me. And it was from his shoulders, or just below his shoulders up. And he was looking at me. And he had black hair. And his face was like was dark also. And it was kind of black, but it was a little bit drier. So the way that it looked was it was almost like a navy blue color in comparison to the black hair that he had. He had a very broad nose, like a smaller forehead that sloped back, and his hair was probably about 2 inches long. And it was kind of brushed, and not brushed back, but that's the way it laid. It laid back. And he had a conical head. And he was just looking at me. And he didn't have any real hair on his face below his lower lip. But he had like a little bit of a beard, kind of like an Amish style beard, I guess you could say. And no facial hair other than that. Very broad nose. Very like primal man looking. And so we looked at each other for about 10 seconds. And then as soon as his face stopped, like left my sight, it was replaced with a female. And she was looking at me. And the thing that got me about her was her face was so human-like. And she was genuinely pretty. And that caught me off guard because I was not expecting that whatsoever. And she had like a lighter complexion. And her hair around her head and her shoulders and everything was like a medium brown color. And her complexion was lighter than that. It was like a tannish color. And we just looked at each other, and she was very pleasant. And she had like a very easygoing, like loving demeanor. And I just remember being very relaxed looking at her. And then again, for about 10 seconds, we looked at each other, and then she disappeared or left. And then when she left, a little one popped in, and he was like a dark brown. I want to say it might have been black hair, but I couldn't really see the color of it very well. So it was a darker color. But the thing about him that caught my attention was the shape of his head. And the outline of his face, where the hair went around his face, was almost football shaped. And it at first reminded me of like Stewie from Family Guy, if anybody's familiar with that. And I remember thinking like, wow, his head is shaped, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but his head's shaped funny. And then it kind of reminds me of the little one that I saw in my room when I was a child, and the way that his mouth was so big that it made his head kind of the same shape. So I don't know if it's something with the younger ones, and maybe that's the way that their heads are shaped. But he just stood there and looked at me, and I looked at him, and again for about 10 seconds, and then he disappeared, and I fell asleep. And I know some people will say that was just imagination, but it was not imagination. And I've since talked with people who have had similar things happen. I've heard it several times from other people on podcasts and things. So, can't exactly explain how they do it, but they can do it. So, that was the group at that area that I had been like kind of interacting with for a few years. That was their way of showing themselves to me. And that was the clearest I had ever seen one, and especially those three at that time. That was the clearest face to face that I had had, and the detail and everything like that. It was just immaculately crystal clean, and it's ingrained in my memory, and I'm forever thankful of that. So I left that day. There was some people that had come through that area at some point, and I didn't see it when I came in that night, but when I was leaving the next morning, I noticed that there was a bunch of trash where it looked like somebody had maybe, it was about a half a mile away, had a bonfire style party at one point. And here in Oregon, like the woods are so broad and so spread out that people can kind of make their way back to these places and do whatever they want. Nobody will ever know. So occasionally when you go back in some of these places, you will have to clean up some people's messes where they go and party. So anyways, that morning while I was leaving, I had to clean up some messes. And I told that group, I said, if you ever need me to come back here and clean up these messes, please just let me know and I will. That was that. So, there was that was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And, that kind of halted a lot of stuff for at least a year, maybe even 2. Like there weren't many campouts anymore with groups. A lot of people had, their lives disrupted to the point where like even just going out into the woods or camping and stuff like that just wasn't really an option. So kind of put things on hold for a couple years, and we still went out and did our camps. We actually ended up going out and camping more in the desert to make sure that we weren't around people. And activity during that period kind of slowed down for a little while. And then, so 2022, we started going back out. I kind of stopped, to be honest. I stopped going back to the places that I had been going to. And I was just spending more time with my family, and we were just doing more camps of like, just, the normal stuff of like family campouts. We were just going swimming, and we were, just doing a whole bunch of things that weren't related to the areas where we had had activity before. And then in 2023, I, reconnected with the group and started camping out. And then I connected with a new group of people, and I went to a camp out near Mount Rainier in Washington. And, this was a group of people who had been camping there, before because they had activity. And if anybody's ever familiar with Barb Shoot, this was one of her group campouts. So I went to the camp out, and it was very laid back, very chill, which is exactly what I like. It's just, it's one of those camps where everybody kind of goes and just has good laughs. You eat good food. You just hang out. And, it's just a very mellow, relaxing, environment. Well, on the second day we were there, it kind of rained, and it was pretty damp and, soggy and, misty that whole day. And I went for a walk with someone, and we walked down the forest road a little bit. That was next to the campsite that we were all at. We walked down the forest road, looked at some things, and then on the way back, ran into one of our other friends that was camping across the forest road in another little area. And she said that she thought she had heard somebody walking through the woods. She had heard footsteps in the woods. And so we, kind of talked about it a little bit, and then we walked back to the main campsite. And, we walked down to the tent. There's a tent that has like, some food and some coffee and things laid out on a table. And I was standing at the table. I think I was getting some coffee or getting something to eat. And, another gentleman that I had originally gone and walked down the road with was standing in front of me. And we were talking to each other. And while I was looking at him and I was talking to him, from the direction that we had just come from, where he had spoken to the woman who said she heard the footsteps, I was looking in that general direction. And while I was talking to him, something in the corner of my eye, some movement, caught my attention. I looked to my left, just moved my eyes over just the littlest bit to my left to look behind him. And as I was standing there looking, I saw a gray a Sasquatch person walk down. Okay, this is kind of hard to explain. So it was in mid-step off the forest road. It's like he appeared out of nowhere, took a step off the forest road, took another step down, and then another step down through a clearing. And on the third step, he disappeared again. So what I saw was a gray Sasquatch person with hair that was probably 3, maybe 4 inches long, pretty long hair, medium gray color. It kind of appeared out of nowhere and took 2 steps. And in the middle of the third step, he kind of disappeared again. And it's not like he didn't step into anything. So it wasn't as if he stepped out of like a portal or anything like that. He just kind of materialized while he was walking. And I don't know if it was the way the light was shining and it just caught him. I'm not really sure, but he had a very human face, and he was probably, I want to say 80 to 100 feet away. And when he disappeared again, I stood there and I was kind of dumbfounded, and I was talking to my friend, and I, again, didn't say anything at first. I just kept talking to him. And then I found Barb, and I said, I just saw a gray Sasquatch person. And she was like, where was he? And I showed her the area, and Barb's very thorough with this type of stuff. So she has a stick that she has set up with like it's like a red circle on the top of it. I think it might be like a plate or something that's kind of on top of it's painted red. And so she was like, okay, well, show me where it was. So I showed her where it was, and she walked over to where it was. And she said, we each had walkie-talkies, and she said, show me, or tell me when to stop when I have the red circle, like at the height that you saw he was. And so I said, okay. And so she lifted the stick up, and I said, okay, stop. And she said, all right. And then she measured that, and he was right at 7.5 feet tall. And so, that was a very interesting sighting, as they all are. But so that was one that I literally saw cloak while he was walking, uncloak and then cloak again, I guess you could say. And that was, again, that was June of 2023. And then in July of 2023, this was in the Blue Mountains of Eastern Washington. And, I was with the same group of people. It was again one of Barb's groups, but it was a different people this time. Some of the same campers, but a few different ones. And this time I brought my oldest son with me. Sorry. And that trip was very eventful. There was a lot of things that happened. Some was not Sasquatch related. A lot of high strangeness, a lot of paranormal. Some star people stuff. And if there's anyone listening to this that has any experience with this type of thing, you know that there's a lot of things that are kind of crossing over each other with this type of stuff. It's not just Sasquatch. There's a lot of other things that are associated with this type of thing. So, there's a lot of events that happened, that were, of the high strangeness category. Some people had sightings. I had not had one yet, but on the last night we were there, we do this thing where we go there and we drum when the sun's setting. And so we drummed and the sun was just about to set, and everybody headed back to camp so that we could, get dinner going. My son and I went back to our campsite, which was kind of up on a little bit of a hill. And we were making our dinner. And while we were eating, we finished making our dinner and we sat down in our chairs, and we were facing the actual campfire where everybody else was at. So there was a group of people sitting around the campfire, and they were all talking and chatting, and the sun was still setting behind us. And so what it was doing was it was shining directly on the campers that were by the campfire. And it was starting to slowly go behind the trees, and it was shining this like beautiful, like golden, like golden hour sun on everybody down there. And I was just eating my dinner, looking at them, and everybody at the camp had their back turned towards us, everyone around the campfire. And again, while I was watching down there, I was looking at the gifting stump, and there's a stump that we have down there that we, lay gifts and things on. And while I was looking at it, to my left, I saw something, and I looked over to my left, and slightly down the hill from where everyone was sitting around the campfire, under some Douglas fir trees that were there, there was this enormous black figure standing under the tree furthest to the right. And it was just watching the people at the campfire, but everyone had their back turned towards it, so nobody could see him. But this was the biggest Sasquatch I had ever seen. And the one that we had seen in Georgia that did the bright eye shine, he was large, and he was, I want to say he was close to 10 feet tall. This one that I saw then, this most recent one, was at least 10 feet tall, and that's being very conservative. If I were to make an estimate, I would say he was closer to 12 feet tall. And he was 5 or 6 feet across the shoulders. He had arms that went down to his mid-shin. I mean, they just seemed like they almost touched the ground. And he didn't have a slim waist. His waist was very, sometimes you'll hear people say like in the shoulders, it comes down to like a slim waist. It's like an athletic build. This one was built just like a brick house. I mean, he was a unit. And it was almost as if he sensed that I saw him. And when I looked at him for about, I want to say 2 or 3 seconds, and it was as if he sensed I saw him, and he turned to his left, which would have been to my left also because he had his back to me. And when it was like in one motion, he turned and he was just gone. And all I saw was a black blur. And he ran probably 30 yards into the woods. And I say ran loosely because I never saw his legs move. It was literally a black blur. And I could feel my brain short-circuiting almost because I couldn't comprehend how something that big could move that quickly. I mean, he turned like 90 degrees, and it wasn't like he set up or positioned himself like he was going to get ready to run. He just turned and was gone. And my brain could not comprehend how something that large could move that fast. And by the body shape and everything, I heard my brain try to rationalize this as big black rectangle, which made me laugh because I was like, really? Like that is how you're going to try to rationalize what we just saw is big black rectangle? So that was the biggest and the most confusing out of all the sightings I've had. That's the one that I think blew my mind the most because I just could not comprehend how something that large could move that fast. And, yeah, that was a trip, and I'll never forget that. That was my last physical sighting, and that was again in July of 2023. I say all these things, and I know that some of it is very hard to believe, and I totally understand that. But I would like to just emphasize a couple things. I grew up in an urban city-like environment, and this type of stuff was just not things I was even close to accepting growing up. Even seeing the one when I was a kid, I had blocked that out of my memories for a long time, and it didn't come back to me until I was able to accept some of this stuff again. And so these types of things, it's not something that comes natural for me. Okay. I understand that some of these things are kind of hard to believe, but I just have to tell these things as they happen to me. And I know some people will understand it because I've spoken to many people who have had similar experiences. So yeah, I also spend a lot of time in the woods, and I mean a lot. I go to the woods all the time. It's always been my sanctuary, whether it's hiking, riding my mountain bike, just like spending time in the woods, sitting, drumming, meditating, just, anything. I spend a ton of time in the woods. So even though these might sound like there's a lot of stuff, I would say like 1 out of every 50 visits to the woods is when something will happen. So, don't expect to have something happen every time you go out into the woods. This takes a lot of determination and a lot of, patience and just devotion to this. Okay. So if you want to get into this type of thing or whatever, and I would say like start off by going into the woods and finding places, like just look on a map, find a place maybe that say has like access to water, and like all the little things that, would make it easier to live in if you were a Sasquatch person, and maybe go try to investigate some of these places, walk around, get a feel for, the area. And if you start to get signs that they might be there, then go back and just frequent that place a lot. And you might have to go back 20 times or more before they might even feel comfortable enough to interact with you. And so just do that. And I will say one thing, like when I first started, I used to walk around a lot and investigate. But if you do find a place where you're pretty sure that they're at, go and just sit. Camp by yourself if you feel comfortable enough, but just go and sit and let them come to you. That's the best way to do this, because this is all at their direction. So if they want to interact with you, they're only going to do it if they want to. You're not going to be able to control the situation. So let them feel comfortable with you, and then they may approach you. And that's how a lot of this stuff started working out for me. And in closing, just a couple more recommendations for anyone that wants to, get more into this type of thing. Be respectful. That's the number one thing that I can stress. When you're in their area, be respectful of their area. Show them respect, and that will go so far with them, because remember, you're in their house, and the way that you act makes a huge impact on it. Because again, if someone comes into your house and they're acting disrespectful, think about how you're going to react to them. So, think about that. And then thank them and all spirits that may be in the area. And I don't mean spirits as in ghosts. I mean like spirits that might be there protecting the area, or tree spirits or elemental spirits or anything like that. That's also there, because they are there. So if you go into an area, thank them, thank the area, thank the spirits, and be respectful, be grateful. And that sets a precedence and a tone for the entire relationship. Have an open mind and an open heart, and walk in love. Just be loving. Try to control your fear. Fear is a big thing on this, because they usually don't want to scare you if they want to build a connection with you. So, again, like walk in love, try to control your fear, set boundaries, and use discernment. Set boundaries for yourself and use discernment on communications that might come in, because there are other things that are out there other than Sasquatch people and elementals and all that stuff. So use discernment, and, don't let anything in. You do have to set boundaries, and then, sometimes they will try to test the boundaries. But most of the time that might be like a little, like say like teenagers or whatever that are just kind of like, want to play jokes or whatever. And talk to them. Talk to them even if you can't see them. Talk to them as if they're there. Again, thank them, be respectful, and just see what happens. But I appreciate the time, and thank you for letting me talk.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking eight bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming on Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming on Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Something going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming on Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, ride chicken porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.